Most people who win $220 million never work another day in their lives. Brad Duke won exactly that and then showed up to teach his 5 a.m. spin class the very next morning. Not because he had to, not because he forgot, but because the night he won, he made a decision that almost no lottery winner in history has ever made. He decided that he was going to stay exactly who he already was. And what he did with that money over the next 11 years turned an ordinary gym manager into one of the most disciplined lottery winners the world has ever seen. Stay to the end, because his single rule for handling sudden wealth is one you'll want to remember, just in case your own numbers ever come up. Before the win, Brad Duke was about as grounded as a person gets. He was a Gold's Gym manager living in the small town of Star, Idaho, just outside Boise. He wasn't struggling and he wasn't desperate. He ran several gym locations, taught spin classes himself, and genuinely loved the work. He drove a used car. He lived in a modest house. He was a cyclist who spent his weekends out on mountain trails, the kind of disciplined, consistent, early rising man who found real meaning in his daily routine. He was, by every description, the last person you'd ever expect to win the lottery. And he was absolutely the last person anyone expected to react the way he did. On May 28th, 2005, Brad made a last-minute stop at a convenience store on his way to a mountain bike race and bought $20 worth of Powerball tickets. He didn't think much of it. He ran his race, he went home, and 2 days later, on his way to work, he checked the numbers. He had matched all 6. Brad Duke had just won $220.3 million, one of the largest Powerball prizes ever awarded up to that point in history. And here is the very first sign of who this man was. He didn't scream, he didn't throw a party, he told almost no one. For days, he simply sat with the enormous weight of it and thought, really thought, about what he was going to do next. He had a decision to make. Take the money as 30 annual payments, or take the lump sum, a cash value that, after taxes, came to roughly $85 million in his hands immediately. He took the lump sum, but not to splurge with it. Brad had actually wanted to stay completely anonymous, but Idaho law required that his name be made public. And the moment it was, the requests came pouring in from every direction. Distant relatives he hadn't spoken to in years, old acquaintances, total strangers, every one of them with a desperate need or a business idea that just needed a little funding. But while every other lottery winner in history was out shopping for mansions, Brad Duke was sitting at home building a spreadsheet. The very first thing Brad did with $85 million was not buy a house. He assembled a team of financial advisors, tax attorneys, and investment specialists, and he sat down with them for weeks. His stated goal, which he actually announced out loud in interviews, was almost absurd in its ambition. He wanted to turn his $85 million into $1 billion, not to spend it, to grow it, to build something that would outlast him. So he split the money with surgical precision. Roughly $45 million went into low-risk, stable investments like bonds. The remaining $35 million went into higher-risk, higher-reward bets, real estate, energy, even a brewery. Every single dollar had a job to do. And then Brad did the most Brad Duke thing imaginable. He went back to work. He kept teaching spin classes at the gym, not for a week, not for a month, but for over a year after the win. His students had no idea they were being coached by a man worth tens of millions of dollars. He just showed up, clipped into the bike, and coached the class. He kept driving his used car for 3 more years. He stayed in the same modest house in Star, Idaho. He did allow himself a few carefully chosen joys. $65,000 on the high-end bicycles he had dreamed about for years, and a $63,000 trip to Tahiti with 17 of his closest friends. And he created the Duke Family Foundation, directing money toward Idaho youth programs and organizations like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and Make-A-Wish. But even his giving was deliberate. He didn't just throw money at causes. Every donation had a plan behind it, the very same discipline he applied to everything else in his life. And this is the part that makes Brad Duke different from nearly every winner you have ever heard about. He wasn't staying modest because he was afraid of the money or because he didn't know what to do with it. He was staying modest because he had studied carefully and deliberately what sudden wealth does to the people who let it redefine them. He had watched Jack Whitaker win $314 million on Christmas Eve and then lose almost everything, his fortune, his reputation, and the people he loved most within just a few years. Brad understood that the lottery curse wasn't a myth. It was a pattern. And patterns can be broken, but only if you see them coming. So he built his entire approach around one single principle, and it's the one line from this whole story worth remembering. Money is a tool, not an identity. It does not change who you are. It magnifies who you already are. And Brad Duke, at his core, was disciplined, grounded, and community-minded. So the $85 million simply made him more of exactly that. The hardest thing he faced through all of it wasn't the strangers knocking on his door. It was the quiet voice inside his own head. The one that whispered, "You have $85 million? So why are you still clipping into a spin bike at 5 in the morning? Why are you still driving a used car? Why are you still living in the same little house? What on earth are you trying to prove?" That question breaks most people who ever try to do what Brad did. But his answer was simple. He wasn't trying to prove anything to the world. He was proving something to himself, that the life he had already built was worth keeping. Years later, once the foundation of his wealth was rock solid, he did finally allow himself the bigger rewards, a larger home, and an Aston Martin that he reportedly almost never drives because it feels too showy for the roads of Idaho. But those things came later, on purpose, long after his discipline had already done its work. Brad Duke set out to turn $85 million into a fortune that would last for generations. And by every account, that is exactly what he built. Quietly, patiently, through discipline instead of splurging. He has been described across national outlets as one of the most grounded lottery winners in American history. Not because he spent the most or built the biggest house, but because, by every measure, he is still the same person he was the morning he drove to work and checked those numbers. In a world where winners routinely lose everything, their money, their relationships, and their very sense of self, Brad Duke managed to keep all three. He kept the money by investing it with discipline. He kept his relationships by protecting his boundaries and learning to say no. And he kept himself by flatly refusing to let $220 million tell him who he was supposed to be. So the title people love to give his story is the winner who stayed poor on purpose. But that's not really it. Brad Duke isn't poor at all. He simply made choices that only look like poverty to people who measure a man's wealth in square footage and horsepower. He chose a used car over a Ferrari. He chose a spin class over a yacht. He chose a trip with his real friends over a private jet. And in doing so, he found the one thing that almost every lottery winner misses completely: a life that the money made better, without ever making him into someone else. So here's my question for you. If your numbers came up tomorrow, could you stay exactly who you are? Tell me in the comments. And if you believe your win is on its way, Subscribe to the Jackpot Oracle and start getting ready for it now, because we believe the universe rewards the ones who are prepared to keep both the fortune and themselves. See you in the next one.